Recording started.
Hey, everybody, want to welcome you to this week's Made Checks It discussion group call for tactical sovereignty. I'm not planning on a very long chat this evening. Maybe somebody has something they want to bring up. If not, that's just the case. Kind of a quiet evening, especially since week after the Super Bowl being done. And things are definitely a lot quieter in the neighborhood than it was last Sunday night. That's for sure. But I've made some pretty good contacts with some people the past week that I plan on having come up for some um, really excellent conversations here in the future. In fact, I'm hoping to do a short series with somebody that has knowledge that isn't really brought out, not really talked about that much about the inner workings of what's happening behind the scenes. More of a spiritual aspect to it, something that isn't really discussed a whole lot, although we can see the evidence of it really being a spiritual battle when we pay attention and notice the different devices being used to try and control the masses and to try and control the perception of people. That's really been showing itself more and more, I would say, probably since the 1980s, since the Reagan administration. It would fall under a category of perception reality. And if they can give you a perception of what they want you to think is happening, then that's going to affect your life. It's going to affect how you conduct yourself. It's going to affect what you pay attention to, where you put your energies at. And that's always really been the battle. Ultimately, it's the battle for the mind. I recommend people read a book called Fire in the Minds of Men. It's a very good book. Discusses this. But that's always been the battle over the mind. And some of the things that have been laid in the groundwork behind the scenes, even when it comes to, for instance, maybe the Federal Reserve or the money or the talisman people carry in their pocket, a lot of things have been used that way just to kind of get its way into your life or into your mindset, into your head. Much the same way that music has done the same thing. That's what it's been used for. It's been used to reach particular groups of people that different organizations or different people had maybe not so good or nefarious agendas wanted to promote. They had things they wanted to promote, and the best way for them really to get into the minds of men was through music. I would recommend people, what want to know, what kind of stuff to research or read. It's something that is a little lighter and not quite difficult reading. Would be Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by David McGowan. It was an excellent, excellent book. And he discusses the music scene, for instance. The music scene was not really the organic movement of the late 60s that this last generation really was used to and grew up with. A lot of these people that came into our lives or came into the music scene not necessarily just because of their talent, but partially because of who they were and the message that the powers that be wanted to spread. If people would recall, around that time was Vietnam War, and it seems like around war times has always been a good time to affect the minds of people and affect their thoughts and affect their attitudes about things and how they conduct themselves. And we would see that around 1970, I would say, in the late 60s also, that era that the youth were conducting themselves much different than had been used to, say 10 years ago, like in the 50s. And this music scene was greatly used for that. And I think that was kind of a good testing ground because they got to see how much the youth would, say, idolize certain people or look up to certain people, and whether or not those people could really affect their lives. And it was very easily to see that that did happen, just through, say, for instance, experimental drug use. It was one of the obvious things, but also when people change the way they dress themselves, the clothes that they wear, and things of that nature, then you've definitely gotten into their thought pattern and into, most importantly, into their values. And if you can adjust people's values and get people's values more in line with the direction that, you know, you would want to see things move in, then it's going to be a lot easier to navigate that ship. You have to be able to have, just enough control there that, just some slight suggestions. Think of them as maybe gusts of wind into the sail of a ship, will direct its motion and have an effect on where it's going to. And that's exactly what they've wanted to do over time. And you can see this going back and studying even into the so-called medieval ages, a lot of the things that the kings did, for instance. And the royalty really did have a concern about the masses and about the inhabitants, and making sure that either their lives stayed busy or their lives stayed eventful enough that they wouldn't be stopping to think about what was really happening around them and the direction that their country was moving in. And the best tool, unfortunately, and this was really discovered about 100 years ago with the Carnegie Foundation. It seems like a lot of these foundations are really what run things and control things. But the Carnegie Foundation set out on kind of an experiment to see if there was a way to change the pattern of people's lives, change the way people thought, without the use of war. And their summation at the end of their mental experiments and looking at things was really that there was no better way than the use of war. And the reason for that would be because war puts a sense of fear in people's hearts and in their lives, and it affects people. When you don't have sons and daughters coming back from the battlefield, that greatly affects a family and instills fear into people, and also helps people unite under things such as patriotism and things like that. And so ultimately, like I said, Carnegie Foundation was trying to find if there was a way to do it without the use of war. But to put it probably more specifically, was there a way to do it better than without the use of fear? And fear was found really, I think, to be the best mechanism. That's what they were really looking for, what the best mechanism is to steer society. And it was easily seen that a society is easily steered through fear. People are manipulated the easiest through fear because it puts them into a state of um, action and reaction. Those roles kind of reverse each other, and so people don't stop and think and then act upon situations that they're faced with. That they're just totally reactionary, and that's what somebody who isn't really thinking does. If somebody is in a situation of, say, panic, or, for instance, imagine you're traveling in the vehicle and somebody pulls out in front of you, you only have a split second to react. You become reactionary. And so, if immediate fear can be put in people's minds, then that's absolutely the best way to control them. If I find it interesting that in scripture it's listed 365 times, fear not, once for every day of the year, fear not. Every day we're supposed to remain in a state of fearlessness. We're not supposed to be afraid. We're supposed to fear not, which means that we have to put our faith into something else. We have to put our hearts, our soul, our mind, our strength has to be based somewhere else than just on the simple little things around us that mean nothing. And people have really put too much faith in things around them that really mean nothing. And so when those things fail them, then it puts people in a state of helplessness. And that's the best state to keep people in, state of helplessness and fear. You can easily, blow into those sails and direct the direction of that vessel. That's something I think people need to keep their minds wrapped around. And those things that we put our faith in really boil down to the contracts that we sign. Our life is way more contractual than people even realize. And the majority of the contracts that we really enter into, we enter into them unknowingly without even thinking about it. What we accept agreements without putting much thought into what's really happening at the time. I mean, some of these contracts can be something just as simple as, like I've said before, holding a door open for somebody. Right? That's an offer. They walk through it, that's acceptance. Do they stop and think that they're going to get halfway through the door and you might slam it on them? No, they really don't. It's they just assume everything's going to be okay. And when we accept these contracts that way, and when we accept these contracts, we have to realize at the same time that whatever we are putting our energy into, whatever we're contracting with, we are legitimizing that source and we're giving power to that source. We're giving authority away from ourselves to that source. And those are just some little things I think people need to stop and consider. Like I said, tonight I just wanted to test a couple things on the board here on the TalkShoe platform because I know that they've made some changes and see what's working good, see what's not working so good. And like I said, I'm hoping to have some episodes coming up shortly here that are going to be pretty stunning because it's going to be things that you don't hear, definitely not in the mainstream media, but you don't even hear them in the alternative media. And this really comes down to the spiritual powers around us, and I like to call them archons, that are controlling this realm and affecting our lives, whether we realize it or not. And the best way to see these spiritual beings or see these archons is really through the actions and activities that occur. Because, like the wind, you can't see the wind, but you can see the leaves blow. Yeah, you can see a piece of paper, fly across a parking lot. That's showing you evidence of the wind. And in the same way, we can see evidence of these archons by the things they are affecting, the things that are being caused to happen. They really can't do much at all on their own. They can't necessarily really manifest in a concrete, you know, structure like a human body or something like that. So they have to do it through other living beings and do it through other people. And, I was mentioning the battle for the minds of men. This lays directly in that category. Because if they can control the minds of men and cause them to do things and enact things that will cause something to occur within a society, you notice those big things, then that right there is where you are seeing evidence of these archons or these spiritual powers that be. And I believe Book of Ephesians talks about principalities and powers. And if you go into the Hebrew where it mentioned those, the word that was really being used meant authorities. And like I've said before, there are beings that have been given authority over different areas of this realm. And that's what we're really seeing evidence of, that they've misused that authority. And they're going to be judged for it at some point. And I believe that we might be in the day of being able to see that. And it means that things are probably going to get a little messy before they get better. But I'll tell you what, we're living in an age right now that most people, I think, have hoped for over the years. But when you get to it and see it, and you see this bottleneck of time that we're getting into, where these things that were supposed to occur, these things that were supposed to happen, everything through the centuries have led this direction. And different things that had occurred was going to culminate to this point. But as you get closer and closer to it, things start to bottleneck, things start to get tighter. And those forces and those authorities start having more of a tighter effect on your life and on your world and on your mindset. And this is what we're experiencing. Like I said, many people have always known this is coming, and some, I believe, even really wanted it to come, but they didn't realize some of the things that people were going to have to endure at this time. Um, It also mentions in scripture, there's a verse regarding those who are alive and remain. And I'd say you look at the Hebrew there as well, because that word for remain really means those who survive. Well, it wouldn't use that if there wasn't something that you had to survive. And, so we just need to put on the armor and do what it takes to make sure that ourselves and our loved ones are well taken care of. This is probably the most important time for community to come together. And you can see evidence of that because they've really been trying to separate community lately, the past couple of years, and isolate people. Because they know that when the community comes together, that's where the power is at. That's where the strength is at that we will all have. And so do your best to, watch for your neighbor, but make contacts that maybe you would not have necessarily made in the past because it's going to take a united front, bottom line. Well, everybody, like I say every week, learn who you really are, where you're really at, and where you're really from. That's what you've been deceived on. And when you learn those things, that's where the strength is going to come from. I said we'll keep this short tonight. We'll see you next Sunday night. Everybody have a wonderful week. And, kind of dwell on the words I've said. Consider it. Give it some serious thought. Thanks, guys.